As we can see, I think from each of these three presentations, addressing climate change in agriculture is going to require institutional policy and investment advances in many areas. I think it's worth pointing out that in many cases, the needed policies for climate change are also good agricultural development policies, but then need some additional tweaks and targeting in order to fully address climate change. So sustainably addressing productivity growth and agriculture development in the face of climate change is going to take, first of all, increasing crop productivity growth through investments in agriculture research, development and use of resource-conserving farm-level technologies, increased investment in rural infrastructure, improve legal and regulatory systems that govern agricultural technology advancements, and overall reformed economic policies as well. Let me just talk briefly about each of these. On crop and livestock breeding, it now needs to be targeted more heavily with abiotic stresses such as heat and drought, and biotic stresses such as pests and disease, which are going to get worse under climate change. But it also then does need to still maintain strong effort on increasing yield more broadly, including investment not only in yields per unit of land, but yields per unit of water and labor as well. Resource conserving management technology that reduces greenhouse gas emissions while maintaining or increasing yields can be very important, including such things as no-till that we've heard about, integrated soil fertility management, or precision agriculture. But a lot of work still needs to be done on these to determine to what extent each of these does actually save greenhouse gas emissions under very specific conditions in different countries. The spreading of appropriate technology is going to need really a better expansion of existing extension systems that no longer rely heavily on public systems, which in the developing world in many cases have fallen apart anyway. This would include then innovative forms of extension through radio, mobile phones, other communication technologies, and with a lot of efforts by NGOs and the private sector, including seed and input companies, as well as the more traditional public extension programs. Increased investment in cost-effective irrigation will also serve to increase the returns to other technologies by more assured water and by saving water, which in many areas could be less of it available under climate change. Rural infrastructure investments more broadly are also going to be essential to provide, particularly for roads, for example, to provide access to markets, information, risk insurance, credit, and inputs, and allow farmers to receive higher prices for their own outputs because by linking them more closely to markets. Legal and regulatory reform is going to be essential. In many countries, there's great barriers to expansion of improved technologies and seed varieties. So in addition to the better extension that I mentioned, we need to remove impediments such as excessive testing and certification requirements for seeds, foreign investment barriers, and ad hoc biosafety decision-making. More broadly, improved economic policies are also needed, and this is politically going to be one of the most difficult things. We need to reduce and eventually remove the subsidies that distort production decisions and result in increased carbon emissions beyond appropriate levels. That includes the massive fertilizer, energy, and water subsidies that you see in many countries. These should be removed. Removing these actually could provide a huge amount of resources to invest in some of the more productive long-term capital investments that I've discussed, such as research and roads. Establishment of secure land and water rights is another very important step forward so that farmers actually can control their own decisions and their own resources to move to the right kinds of technologies. Another big area that's lately not done that well is to maintain open international agricultural trading regimes. We saw from the results that Keith presented that despite significant growth in crop yields, for example, most African countries will greatly expand their food imports in coming decades, as well as many of the big countries in Asia. That, combined with what Heather was mentioning about increased variability, shows that climate change is going to really increase the stability and the ability of countries to import food when it's needed. So in order to meet those needs of greater imports and highly variable inputs, open trading regimes need to be maintained rather than moving towards the kind of additional restrictions that we're seeing in much of the world. But more targeted policies are also necessary. I think this is one of the key points that both Heather and Alex mentioned, that to get down to which specific policies are going to work in which specific country and for which crops and so forth, there has to be much better spatial targeting of the types, costs, and benefits of climate adaptation and mitigation. And that will require much more advanced ICT to streamline implementation, monitoring, so we even know what's going on, and evaluation of impacts, adaptation potential, and mitigation. There also needs to be, and this will be one of the big focuses on COP, and we'll see how it goes forward, we need to reform the global architecture on climate change policy so as to enhance the various global financial facilities and governance that try to increase flows of money into agriculture adaptation and mitigation in developing countries. And just finally, the kinds of work, the kinds of policies that are going to be needed, including the targeting especially, is going to need expansion of the kind of research that we heard that both WRI and IFPRI are doing in terms of integrating biophysical and economic data on a spatially disaggregated basis, working across scales from household to nation to the world in order to be able to assess the trade-offs between yield and income and climate and environmental impacts in adoption of new technologies and policy. With this kind of analysis, we hope to continue to support correct decisions, but this is a very major challenge ahead. Thank you.